Without wasting much time, I'm now going to introduce, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Professor Funmi Olonisakin, who is also my mentor alongside Professor Marcia Wilson, my sponsor, my role model. See, I was very fortunate to learn more about her when I was working part-time in diversity and inclusion at KCL. And I was working on a project to refresh the frieze, so it's a profile of all the female professors at King's. And when it was put up, I remember I was invited because my then scientific supervisor was an Italian woman, and they were asked to invite somebody that inspires them, and she invited me. And I remember looking up and seeing no professors of color, no Black professors. And I immediately said, my goodness, are you telling me there's no Black professors at King's College London? Not even one. And then the students had a bit of an outcry, and it was the then principal, Sir Ed Byrne, that contacted Diversity and Inclusion where I happened to be. And then my manager then, Debbie Epstein, said, Bernadine, I know you're very passionate about wanting to be a professor. Do you want to write an email to the female professors of color that did exist, whether they'd like to be part of the frieze? To cut a long story short, contacted Prof. She was like, yeah, why not? And she joined the frieze. Now, if you go to King's, because I still remain a visiting lecturer at King's, if you go there and look at the frieze now, you'll see professor, you will see an Asian professor, and you'll see a Chinese female professor. At least there's representation. Now, when I told one of my mentees who's studying King's at studying medicine at King's that she was there, had I known, I would have captured her response, and she screamed, my goodness, there's a professor that looks like me. And me personally, I then knew, yeah, I can become that professor, because I needed to see her there. Now, as I mentioned, I do remain a visiting lecturer at King's, and I need to mention Dr. Nigel Eady, who is a Director of Research Talent, Centre for Doctoral Studies and Centre for Research Staff Development. If you remember earlier on, I said that it was them that supported me for the 2018 conference when Diversity and Inclusion were not going to support me under someone else. And he has been amazing throughout, and he has said he's put money aside in his budget to support this conference moving forward. So I need to mention him, and I need also to mention Dr. Kathy Barrett. Lastly, when we were conducting the 2018 conference, which was our second year, we had a networking session afterwards. Little did Prof know, who was a keynote speaker then, that the networking session was specifically for her, for us to introduce Professor Funmi Olonisakin, who is she was the first only Black professor at King's. Now, let me just briefly go into her profile. You guys can read it, but just in case you don't have time to. Professor Funmi Olonisakin is a vice president, vice principal, international, and Professor of Security, Leadership and Development at King's College London. She founded the African Leadership Centre, which aims to build the next generation of African scholars and analysts, generating cutting-edge knowledge for peace, security and development in Africa. She was director of the Conflict, Security and Development Group at King's College London from 2003 to 2013. Prior to this, she worked in the office of the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict. In 2018, she was appointed to the Council of the United Nations University. Now, what I need to explain is that doesn't really give her justice or do her justice. But as I suppose there's only so much you can write. So over to you. Let's hear from the wonderful woman herself. I give you Professor Funmi Olonisakin.
Bernardine, that is so very, very kind, so very generous, and so very much like you. Thank you so much. You know I wouldn't miss this ever, whether it's to attend, to listen to other people, or to attend in this. Reinforce that and say how delighted I am to see how this BME Early Career Researchers Conference has grown. It's grown by accretion since April 2017, when you first did launch this at Keynes, Bernardine. And so it's a real privilege to know you and to see how you have persevered in the development of this platform. And let me also say that I am proud of the excellent work done by my sister, still being done by my sister, Marcia Wilson, who's now at the Open University. I was really inspired by this morning's opening, both by the remarks of professors Tim Blackman and Professor Gus John. Indeed, I should say that Gus's contribution to the advancement of BME in academia is a significant one. I have enormous respect for him. I know that this morning he challenged us deeply in deeply profound ways. And his keynote actually inspired me to nuance this particular talk in order that we can begin to deal with the substance of the issues that he raised. He's put some critical and important points on the table. And I think we need to, in response, think around questions of how we might fashion a meaningful strategy as a collective. But I'll come to that in a moment. But just to say that I gave my talk initially this title, Developing and Retaining Thriving BME Early Career Academics. I'm inspired by the statement that actually we are AGMs, African and global majority. So that's an interesting one. But let's tackle. I would only say some things in headline form. Let's talk about in headline form the nature of the problem itself. It's been well articulated in the last 4 years and before then. So there's no need to dwell too much on it except to remind ourselves in headline form. And I believe Bernardine at the start of this program this morning reminded us of some of this. So clearly the issue we face is an important one. The question in front of us really is how can we break the recruitment stagnation retrogression cycle? Breaking the cycle of recruitment to stagnation to retrogression, and retrogression includes leaving academia altogether sometimes for BME academics, in order to ensure that we have a stable pipeline and that the retention of thriving BME academics becomes a reality in this environment. It's a tall order, but it's not insurmountable at all. And I think we already see, I was saying to Bernardine yesterday, I think it was, we had a brief chat, and I said in the past few weeks, I myself have been having a sober reflection that a young Black African woman that I've mentored since she was 15, and who was so proud to finally make it to become a lecturer in a Russell Group University, resigned from that place after going through confirmation of probation and then settling down into her lectureship. She resigned about 3 weeks ago. And it caused me to ask myself some deep questions, actually quite sad for me, because the combination of the pandemic and the environment, the unnurturing environment in which she has had to survive in the past couple of years, meant that she just really had to leave all of that, and she will now go to industry somewhere to work. And that itself is an anecdotal evidence of the kind of challenge that we're facing. It's a structural one. Gus is right. I think everyone that has been speaking to this issue understands the nature of structural racism and the structural exclusion that we face. So this scenario is not one that is, that is strange to us. Understanding why, though, still requires further research. The why do we have, do we not have a BME pipeline that we can find and maintain? Because if we're really talking about changing the culture and the structures, we require this pipeline to be real and to be stable. So, but you can see the scenario. For many of you that might follow the data and all forms of statistics in your institutions, let's be clear that in the vast majority of cases, the scenario is such that applicant numbers are high. When BME candidates apply, once you see an advert, an announcement, those numbers gradually reduce from then to shortlisting. They're still fairly high, sometimes at shortlisting. Then you move into interview process and final selection, and suddenly the percentages and the numbers reduce by half. We have to understand very clearly why by really going back into the data in our institutions and to begin to see what it is that can even deal with things at that level. But I will soon talk about the whole question of strategy and tactics, because understanding those very clearly become very important. Same thing for progress, promotion numbers. When you look at the ratios of BME, in fact, Black that are promoted compared to others, it continues to be low, could be better. All right, and different universities are doing different things. But actually, of course, the numbers will be low if you never even recruited them in decent numbers in the first instance. But for those that are within the institutions, you begin to see the nature of the challenge that they face. Now, then you finally enter the institution, long years being postdoc or being fractional staff members, you finally get the lecturership, then you stagnate for quite a while. My own story is a prime example of this as well. Bernardine already spoke about hers. I was in that fractional stage for certainly short-term contracts for close to a decade in the same institution where I thrived as a doctoral candidate. So we need to really get into we need to study ourselves and our institutions and our experiences and make sense of them in order to really put forward a robust strategy. Of course, dare I speak about poor representation in leadership positions. I cannot count on my 5 fingers people like myself in UK higher education. I can probably look at, is it Glasgow, Edinburgh, look at maybe one of the small Oxford colleges, if we're looking for following the career of Baroness Amos. We are so few across the UK. Why should it be so? Look at the numbers of professors, look at the numbers in senior leadership. If we're not sitting around the table where decisions are being made, how can we begin to see that pipeline become something in which people thrive and in which people rise or up the ranks? So really clearly, reversing this trend is a mission that requires a collective approach. It does. I will soon come back to the points being made by Gus this morning. And so I think I want to stress it's important that we are clear about strategy and tactics. The relationship between them also matters a lot. We need to take both seriously. And so the argument I want to put on the table for us to begin to consider, it's not a one-day conversation. It has to be continuous and it has to be collective, is that structural change can only come through the simultaneous pursuit of legislation, its implementation, its robust implementation, culture and institutional change in universities, attitudinal change. I mean, I want to say behavioral change as well. It goes without saying, but I'm especially hinting, in fact, more than hinting, suggesting strongly that attitudinal change is of a greater quality than behavioral change among university staff, students, university leaders, and so on. We need to take individual and collective responsibility as a BME community. So at the end of the day, as someone myself who was a student leader, and I, when I was much younger, I needed that change yesterday, radical change and nothing else. But I've come to appreciate that everything has to be on the table, both the pursuit of radical change, that revolutionary change that comes only once in a generation, as well as incremental change. That, and that radical change can come because of moments of opportunity. I think that's what Gus was referring to when he talked about the epiphany of the George Floyd killing and our reaction and Black Lives Matter movement. So let's put that in perspective. So I'm saying the structural change that means profound change in law that Gus was referring to is without a doubt very important. That's the thing that finally helps us transform. I saw a question in the chat earlier where someone was saying, how can we be sure that in any case government will take that action, that policy change will happen in that way, or that they will pursue it? All right, that's a big question we always have to consider, and it's why we need multiple platforms, while we need to keep multiple doors open, but to guard it strategically with the right kind of message and narrative and pursuing the particular outcomes that work for us. I talked about attitudinal change amongst the staff and students in our universities, in various institutions, because sometimes just changing the law alone, even in the university, and putting some of the punitive measures there, even for those university leaders and institutions that want real change, that itself does not transform, does not translate into attitudinal change. It might give you behavioral change, but attitudinal change requires a wholesale transformation, which means that we have changed, the beliefs, the values, the norms that make us think that another human being is inferior to us and therefore does not deserve, all right, to thrive in the institution. This is the prevailing thing that needs to transform. And so laws do something, regulations do something, but the work of achieving that transformation in attitudes and mindsets is something that requires that relationship building must be different, must change. So I found Gus's keynote, it was a tour de force, and he's provided us with a strategic framework. So therefore, the goal and the outcome that we seek should be nothing short of structural change. But I think the conversation needs to be deepened to help us really investigate. So of course, that includes effective enforcement of national legislative frameworks, especially that law on race equality, preventing structural racism, and the importance of collective strategy and narrative. But the work has only just begun when you pursue that. Why? Because it's not a guarantee. It isn't. So let me then move to specifics in terms of why we need to do strategy and tactics and pursue that rigorously, vigorously at the same time. One, there's complexity. There's complexity. When we look at the laws from 2000, 2010, and all of that, and we look at where we are, this society has changed. So there's changing. When you look at the context outside of the law, look at the government in place today, and look at whether we have strong signals as to whether there's commitment to that kind of structural change. Set that aside, then look at the demographics. That is in almost stark opposite to a Generation Z that is pursuing social justice. It's why the Black Lives Matter movement last year was the way it was. So you saw a new generation of students in our classrooms. Many of us here, many of you are, early career, and you're seeing those young people across genders, across races, all right, across classes, And of course, there's an extreme, there's almost like a polarization of the conversation. But when you see those who have banded together, we then have to be asking some questions, all right? Thirdly, we have multiple channels and actors. And some of them actually sometimes almost enthusiastically taking us in the opposite direction. I think is partly what Gus might have been referring to. But we also have multiple moments of opportunity. They're rare. Sometimes those moments are because there's a change in government. Those moments might be because there's a change in university leadership, or that we have a monumental event like the death, the killing of George Floyd. All right? But for sure, and that's my last point about context, there's much more to that, but I want to be able to bring home some of the points that I'm making. Complex identities and diversities. So when we talk about AGM as we are, well, I quite like that phrasing a lot. We're working class, we're gendered in various ways, all right? We hold different privileges and we change, all right? There's also flux in all of this. What I was at King's College London 10 years ago is not what I am there today. So my status has changed. I hold that privilege, but I still remain a Black African woman, all right? And even as we speak about our inequalities, the fact is, you can see that sometimes our male colleagues are just doing marginally better. We're all really suffering or enjoying inequality in different ways, all right? Was it Tolstoy that said, every happy family is alike? Every unhappy family, all right, is unhappy in its own different way. So privilege stands. You can almost see every privileged group. There's something I like about them. Those that are not privileged, you can begin to see the differences in our experiences. What am I saying? It is complex, it is nuanced, it is a wicked problem. And we need to study it and understand it and come together with a narrative that gives us the right shades of nuances, but that allows us a collective strategy and also get down to the tactics that we deploy in order to get to where we want to go ultimately. So what are those questions around our strategy and tactics? I want to put several on the table, and I'm not about to answer them today because complexity requires that you frame those questions and begin to find answers in different locations. But first, can enforcement of legislation happen in this government and in successive governments? Do we have enough in the history of the last couple of decades to be assured that without taking particular steps and particular tactics, that legislation and enforcing it in the way that we want can get us where we want to go? Second, what actions do we take when university leaders are committed to anti-racism? I was inspired by the lecture I heard this morning, by the opening remarks from Tim Blackman. What do we do as a community of BME academics to rally around that and ensure that the tactics are really taking us towards our collective goal, all right? And third, we need to take a decision, but I lean somewhere on this one. Should we completely abandon things like the race equality charter mark? That came up this morning, and I thought, many of the questions this morning were profound and they reflected the complexity. And this is where I think that sometimes, if you can just still jam your toe in the door to open that door, for those of you who know Kings, you know just how very white and privileged it was for a long time. In the past few years, we have consistently had more than 50% students, undergraduate students from Black and minority ethnic groups at King's. So when your community is full of diversity, when they come in, but the leadership does not resemble that community, and that community is making demands, I will not have the luxury of waiting for Boris Johnson's government to change its mind about where race equality stands. I have to use everything within my own space to try to change things for the better for those students who are making demands of us in the way that Bernardine was talking about. She already described the King's context to you. So to my mind, the race equality charter mark and submitting something with, a set of actions that we will take means that I can wave that in front of my university to make some structural changes because we committed to it. And by the way, we got that bronze in 2015. We lost it in 2017 or 2018, and we only just got it back this year. So something that holds us to account, that says you do not merit this bronze. It's not the best thing, I take Guz's point, but it's what we have, and it is what I can use to change my space. And I think we need to all reflect on that, because if we're just going to use it only to, and it's true, just like global rankings in universities, many universities would say we're number 10 or 20 in the world, but look at the quality of the human beings in those institutions. Look at what they do with the excellence and the rankings. There is no real social justice even going on in the institutions, let alone their contributions to society. I get it, but we have to hold ourselves to account and do more. So, and therefore, lastly, what happens when we say our students, these students of a new generation, Generation Z, collectively do social justice work across race, genders, and classes? What if allyship matters to them? I think it's our responsibility to define and redefine that allyship to do the things that Gus was talking about, because I see the point. You cannot claim to be an ally, and yet you continue to really profit from the privileges of structural racism. But you can be an ally that crosses that line to make the kind of demand of enforcement. It does not mean that we throw the baby away with the bathwater. And so there's a lot to reflect on. And therefore, I think in trying to bring this to a close, I think in terms of tactics, we need to take collective and individual responsibility. Let's not have NATO meetings, as in no action but talk only, every year in this forum. Let's take action at an individual level so that at a minimum, there are commitments we make to ourselves, but also collectively as well. And it's on this that I want to make a closing set of comments. First, collectively, we need to determine a clear narrative and set the parameters in terms of the outcomes we're seeking together, what structural change means and what to demand. And I think I align myself completely with Gus in that area. We need to be clear on messaging. We need to be determined in the way that we put the right standards in place about what structurally needs to end and what needs to happen as a new start in our institutions, but also in the country as a whole, and stay and keep that line, hold that line. Second, we need to define really what allyship means so that it is not watered down to allow power holders. All right, when we talk about white allies, I think there's also nuance there, really. So I would say to allow power holders to hold the duality of making supporting statements, not nearly enough, whilst retaining the privileges of structural racism. You can't have it both ways. But I think allyship exists. It's the same way in which Martin Luther King, when he made that "I have a dream" statement, you looked in the crowd, you saw far many more people, you saw all these Black people, but look at the white people in the crowd. Look at the African National Congress in South Africa. You have the Albie Sachs who lost his arm. You have those who lost eye, limbs, supporting the apartheid movement. White. And so I want us to challenge ourselves to ask for great quality that we want, that will take us home to where we want to be when we talk about allyship. We need to debate it, all right? We also need to alter our collective and individual practices. And I want to leave us, challenge us to close, as I close today, to promise ourselves that at least if we're not doing this already, let's not come back next year in a way that we haven't changed. The first promise I want us to make is that we will belong to a network, no matter how small it is, where we continue to push some of these ideas and agendas. And I'm not talking about our academic networks, professional networks, because we're in the chemistry society or in the politics society. That's a given. Let's look for each other beyond our academic institutions, because in some of our institutions, you look around and you may not find a Black person inside for a long time. And so even I, at King's as a student, my mentors were white men. I've written about this elsewhere. So you have people who hold your hands, but they may not be able to be part of your struggle. To be part of this struggle seriously, we need to look for each other in the small and big networks to pursue that common agenda and to push behind it, all right? The second thing is we need to alter the quality of our mentoring practice. I say that about myself, I say that to my senior colleagues, but I say it even to our junior academics, because you can only practice, what you practice today is what you would do when you're a senior academic. Hold someone's hand so that you're not working alone. You're co-creating, you're co-authoring, you're co-publishing. Come back here next year and say, yes, there's another BME scholar that I have worked with. Let a senior person say, there's a junior BME scholar that I've worked with, co-authored with, and so on. Let us be able to go to the website and find that that's part of your practice, that you check up on, and that you introduce to your rich network. Let's make that commitment. And finally, let's be able to come back and say that after this conference this year, we went outside of our zones of comfort in our university space, in our small networks, and we reached out to another network, to another university, because that university has far fewer Black academics who are thriving, just to ensure that we can truly look around and set a benchmark for ourselves, that when we get to the point of, I guess next year is 5 years, but let's set a target that 10 years after we've been having this series of conferences, we can say truly that we broke the cycle, that I described earlier as a cycle of recruitment, stagnation, and retrogression. That we now have a cycle in which we're actually not only developing, but we're retaining a pipeline, and we have thriving BME early career academics and thriving BME academics, leaders in short, distributed across institutions. I will leave it here. Thank you so very much for inviting me to do this again, Bernardine. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Professor Funmi. I think most of us are going to have to play this back to remember everything that has been said to us today. But for me, I have made some notes, and I think the ending part specifically is we must come back with a thriving BME group of early career researchers and the thriving BME leaders. Really, truly, we need a BME pipeline. Very, very important. I agree, we need these moments of opportunity to be that change, make that change. I agree, we need to be clear on our messaging and narratives, okay? And for me, this is brilliant. Alter the quality of our mentoring practice. Hold someone's hand. Very, very important. Cannot underemphasize that. Now, with that, I'm going to open up any questions. Please, if you have any questions, put it in the chat, and I will definitely ask Professor Funmi. Whilst you're putting your questions in the chat, I'm going to ask a question. So, Prof, you said you're not the same person you are 10 years ago. Would you like to expand a little bit more? For those that don't know you, because I know, but most people don't.
Oh, okay, so Ted, thanks, Bernardine. Although really I was talking about the question of privilege, all right? Privilege changes, all right? I couldn't say that 10 years ago, that I had a privileged position at King's College London. I didn't. In fact, I didn't over a space of 20 years. Interestingly, by the way, for those who don't know me, King's College London has been my institutional home through and through. I was not always, if you like, a preferred candidate. I can't say that I'm always still a preferred candidate. I struggled my way at times through that institution in some of the ways that Bernardine discussed. But I have to say, I acknowledge that I had people who took personal interest in my career. And they were white men, by the way. And that's what I meant by you can have people who take personal interest in you because they're decent human beings. They may not be interested in the struggle, in your struggle as a collective is what I mean. And so power and privilege changes in its distribution. Even for the individual, we change. My challenges might be gendered today and racialized tomorrow, and they might actually be class-based the day after. But so if I go back not just to 10 years ago, I can confidently go back to 15, 20 years ago and say I was really poor, dirt poor. I was not really recognized in my, in all of those early career struggles. In that sense, I was looking for a permanent contract, didn't have it for a long time. I can also say that I was overlooked in different ways. And I held all those three intersectionally. The point I wanted to make when I talked about race, gender, and class, of course, for all of us here who are familiar with this, is the intersectionality work. But today I can't say that my challenges at King's are exactly the same as a young early career academic Black woman who's just coming. No, I hold privileges at King's, both in terms of my position as a professor, my position as Vice President International. You have to ask me, and I have to ask myself how I use those privileges. That's what I mean. So I can't claim to be as as discriminated against as someone else because I can use the power of office to a certain extent. I can. That's what I meant by my situation then and now. They have changed. And so we always have to ask ourselves what privileges we hold in relation to the people around us. And that's something that we need to really be conscious about.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And clarifying that. So Mojo has asked, how can she connect with you? How can people connect with you?
So let me say this, and Bernardine knows that. So one of the ways in which you can probably connect with me is through Bernardine. My email address is funmi.olonisakin@kcl.ac.uk. I am very, very bad at responding to emails on time. That is true, but somebody monitors it if you say urgent. Many of you know that I have responded to you personally when you've asked me for research, reference. It takes a while for me to do it. But when you do it through the likes of Bernardine, my phone rings very quickly. Prof, somebody is looking for you. And I respond to it. I do. The reason why it takes me so long to read is that sometimes I receive about 100, 150 messages per day. That was not my life 10 years ago. I could actually go back to my email. And so if I happen to be in front of the screen when you're writing that, I respond very quickly. I may miss it, but someone comes through it and would present it. It might take me a while to respond. I always do my best to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Another question from Dave. He says, thank you for a brilliant keynote. To what extent do we need to advance from mentoring towards a combination of mentoring, coaching, and sponsorship for early career researchers?
By the way, I don't distinguish between any of those. I think any one of them at any point in time, we use them in combination. It can't be sequential. We coach when that's what's needed. We mentor. And mentoring, by the way, is a two-way thing. My life is richer because you are in it. Because a number of young people, I truly feel that I'm on top of my game a lot. because of the younger academics that I interact with, not because of my mates at my level. I think it's a two-way street, that where there's an accompaniment. It's a relationship. So mentoring for me is a relationship. It's a lifelong relationship. You're my network. Once we know each other, that means there's someone you can pick up the phone and call. And it's not because I have the answers, but I connect you to my network. But it also means I can pick up the phone and call you because there's something I need in your, either in your field, in your country, or because I'm trying to help another person, you know, get across the bridge. And I love the mentoring, the, you know, it's not even an intergenerational thing. It's an interactive mentoring relationship. That means that we are each other's, you know, accompaniment in a sense. And that doesn't mean that we don't add coaching to it. When something needs sponsorship, that we step up and sponsor is also very, very important.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tanimola asks, how can an individual encourage diversity within their institution without coming across as an activist? Good question.
By the way, what's wrong with being an activist? This is the thing that we're told, because we're saying diversity matters, we're told we're being activists and being political. Life is political. And I think that, and of course, many people will challenge this because we present the academic environment in such sanitized way, like you can't, it's beneath us to have biases or to be active, you know, to be activists because there's a change we want to make. I'm a firm believer in putting your bias on the table and talking about the change you want to make and support it with evidence. Scholarship on the issues that concern us is part of our activism, but I will not peddle information that I don't have evidence for, all right? And that's what I think we need to understand, that it is okay to be an activist as long as you're in the business of generating evidence to support it. And it's in not saying, it's in wanting to not come across like we're activists that gets us to a place where actually we silo ourselves and we don't show who we are. At King's, and by the way, we constantly have conversations around, you know, what's decolonizing, what it isn't. And in an institution like King's, it's important to bring evidence to bear when you're having conversations that are a great part of a great debate. In any institution, anyway, we have to bring evidence to bear. And so you may not find many academics agreeing with me on that issue, but if you look at my own history, whether I told you I was a student union leader, that was many months ago in Nigeria. I worked at the United Nations. I worked in support of humanitarian programs. I worked in conflict-affected countries. And something suggests to me that you cannot be neutral in those contexts. You cannot be neutral to injustice. You have to be activist about it and deploy your scholarship in support of it. Yeah? So don't worry about being seen as an activist as long as you use the knowledge that you have and bring it to bear.
Absolutely. Please keep questions coming. This is amazing. So Thiam asks, I am a Black Muslim woman. I also have parenting responsibilities. And so far, I find that academia is configured for those without parental responsibilities. The system is only flexible for those in mainstream psychology and not me. What is your advice?
By the way, you could say this. Again, I just responded to something around activism. There's a way in which the environment makes you feel that you cannot progress if you don't generate X number of these kinds of journal article, this kinds of high profile, if you like, conference events and so on and so forth. I know it's a struggle. So some of us Even when I was doing all of the fractional work, he couldn't put food on my, well, he could put food on my table, couldn't pay my rent. So I still had to do other jobs. Even as I was studying, I did other jobs to pay my way. And some people are young parents, they have young children. Look at what happened during the pandemic, that people then had to be doing homeschooling. I think this is why it's especially important to find other people who are experiencing what you're experiencing and put your case on the table together. Because it's so easy, and this is also heavily gendered, okay? So you can have a couple, they're both academics. One still has, ultimately, this doesn't apply to all men. I know both types of men, both types of male parents. Some work freely to work, don't look back, and their partners bear the burden of childcare, caring for many things. Some share in that responsibility. It's different types, but in the main, many women take that load. And I think it's important to find like-minded people in the same way that we look for BME academics that we can push agendas together. And that's why I talked about the intersectionality aspect of this. We're not, at the same time that you are a Muslim woman, you're also a BME woman, you're also a woman, by the way. You might have other identities as well. So you're not one identity at any point in time, but that which impacts one the most. Find people who are walking the same road and then make your demands together. And you're entitled to make particular demands. And I think very early on in our careers, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping that some of us at the senior level can change. This gun-ho nature that you must only produce one particular form of knowledge in order for that knowledge to count. We need to shift it significantly because even when you're making impact in other areas, the fact that you have establishments that recognize only one form of impact itself is problematic. But there's a lot to be done. We have to change the face of that. I'd say work with like-minded people, with people who are experiencing the same things, and push and make demands on that basis.
Thank you ever so much. A question from Alexander. Says, thank you for your important reflections. What would you say is the difference between what Ibram Kendi describes as assimilationism and anti-racism? How would you say we can leave assimilationism behind for genuine anti-racism? Tom?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question too. When you think of assimilationism, you can even think back to colonial times, and I'll use the continent of Africa and look at the two different methodologies that you have in Francophone Africa, two different approaches in Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa. One used indirect rule. The British governed those colonies by indirect rule. The French governed through the principle of assimilation. That principle remains in so many different ways today. And so the idea that I am Black African, I've never been to Paris, all right? But I'm in Dakar, I'm in Cameroon, the French part of Cameroon, and I say, je suis française, all right? I'm French. There's something fundamentally troubling about that, which means the mind's been messed up with. And actually, we're trained even to begin to relegate citizens in those countries to the, relegate them to the background and discriminate against them because there's a false concept of being French or a false concept of being English. Assimilation has never been the thing that works because it only works for the power holder. And so ultimately, my own language that I use, and I think the important thing is to be reflexive enough to understand that. I call it cultural competency. It's not enough that I have integrated, that you're trying to integrate me into your society to be like you. It's actually particularly important that you see my world, you see the world through my own eyes too. I see the world through your eyes. So the ability to see the world through the eyes of the other has to be the principle. That cultural competency is what we must use to deal with gender difference, is what we must use to deal with all forms of differences. because otherwise we will do a disservice, we'll do injustice to the other, because we see a superior world that we're trying to integrate people to. We want them to assimilate, but we can't see the world. And it doesn't matter what we do, they will never be exactly like we are in our world. And I think that's an excellent question that we need to really turn this structural racism on its head. We need so many conversations about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question from Are there any mentorship programs for Black researchers across higher education in the UK?
Yeah, interesting. So now this is another area where some siloing is going on. And I think part of what, Bernardine, we might think about, you want to think about for this conference is maybe have a panel next year that if we've managed to map those mentoring programs. It's siloed in the sense that I only know the ones I'm involved in. And that's at the African Leadership Center, but it's also the ones that we do with the Social Science Research Council and so on. So it is siloed into discipline and is siloed into region. And I think there's more work that needs to be done. Some are very tiny programs, some are, bigger than different ways, but for many, many programs, they don't exist. So I think it's worth really thinking about this, because it also affects funding patterns as well, even just to be able to collectively seek funding. And so this is the kind of work that we need to do. Thank you for that question. I'm going to make a note of it. If I come across anything, Bernardine, I'll try and send them your way.
Thank you. Sally asks, there are gender differences in being an early career AGM in academia. Can Prof share how she has navigated the double burden of being a Black woman academic and the key things Black female early career researchers should particularly take note or work on?
Wow. I've seen this so much, and this is where I have to say that there are individual differences, but you see common patterns in terms of how we experience this, because really, honestly, there's a difference. I saw early days of my career, the differences between some of my Black male academic colleagues and even some of us women, and the things that actually helped our success, they're found at 3 levels. The nature of the context of the work and how sensitive they are to this gender difference. This is why I was telling our colleague who said she was a Muslim woman who was navigating this space, that altering your context at work becomes very important. And that's also where a form of allyship exists, all right? Because if your colleagues don't know your male colleagues, if our male colleagues do not understand the circumstances we're in, but also benefit from male privilege, it's a problem. So you can see the very many dimensions of what we're talking about. But there's also, there's an institutional angle to it, the context of the work environment, immediate, departmental, institutional. There's a cultural dimension to it. So what it means to be a Black African woman who is heavily impacted by the culture of you are that woman. I can't imagine any woman academic and any Black woman academic that does not understand really structured gender work, because negotiating that space of the culture is a very, very, very big one. And I went through the process of negotiating my cultural space. It means ultimately maybe offending holders of structural power, of cultural power, when you suddenly remove yourself from those settings because you're making choices. And let me tell you, it is real, but you have to define yourself in such fundamental way. But lastly, if you are married or if you have a partner, how the support you get from that partner or that marriage, whatever the nature of that relationship is, goes a long way. Some of us are not always fortunate to have that support. So it's a combination of things. One of my colleagues, Professor Allow, he won't mind me saying this, says in life, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. So we are endlessly negotiating the spaces we're in. And the more you are able to find allies, or at least people like-minded now, or people you have the same experiences with, is not just an alliance. It has to be that you have the mutuality you build together to make demands. But sometimes you're on your own. You have to negotiate the cultural space. You have to negotiate the relationship space. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Somebody asks, Emma, who were and who are your role models?
Oh, wow. No, there's some of my role models, very simple. One for a very, very long time, even still in memories, my role model, my grandmother. She raised me. First love that I encountered in a human being. She loved me without condition. Told me I could be whatever I wanted to be. Was my best friend for a long time. Of course, the age difference means that I lost her, early in life. Professionally, also, my role model at the time who encouraged me. There were very few women who studied what I studied for my PhD, my master's and PhD at the time. Very few African women, I should say. That was war studies. I was the first African to graduate with a PhD in war studies. So there were not many before me. Margaret Vogt, who was at the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs and finally also was a senior member personnel at the United Nations. Late Margaret Vogt was one of my models. Again, my role models in the profession. Encouraged me a lot. Also gave me the impression that, you can navigate gender difference. And of course, the intergenerational relationships are also very important in that regard.
Right, brilliant. Our last question is from Janice Harris, who is a PhD researcher. Just finished her first year, sorry, don't assume it's a female. And race is a key concept for their thesis. Their supervisors are all white. While they're all great and knowledgeable, they can't help but feel like they don't understand some of the nuances the student refers to. How best should they proceed through their studies with such a dynamic?
Find them, because these are your supervisors, you're probably the only Black woman in that environment, and that happens a lot. The only Black person, I don't know, in that environment, that happens a lot. And this is where I see the mentoring, even supervision is a two-way street, all right? They have the academic, technical know-how in terms of how you present your work. Find them some YouTube channels. Find them, let's hope that they're also open to trying to understand what race is through the eyes of people who have lived through it or studied it in particular ways, because also they embody some of those experiences. Find them something to watch, please. Find them something little to read. Give them links to things so that you say, giving feedback to your supervisors is also important. Of course, doing it respectfully. I know that there's a power dynamic to that relationship. Doing it respectfully. Saying, when you say this, there's something called feedback too in leadership studies. When you said what you said, this is how it made me think. This is how it made me feel. And I think that I should explain myself more through this video, through this. I hope you don't mind. It's a constant dialogue. You have to negotiate the space because you need this degree as well in order to begin to thrive. And sometimes you don't get everything that, you're not exactly where you need to be as you're studying and get the degree, but yet it's a stepping stone to what you want to do. But you have to negotiate that space is what I would say.
Thank you ever so much. So we've now come to the end of our second keynote speaker. Please, everyone, show your appreciations for your whatever claps, whatever you do it. Thank you all to those who are very active in the chat, sharing your networks. I need to call out or shout out give a shout out for Manish, who started it. Oh, thank you, Augustine, for that. Manish for asking everyone to network in here. Brilliant. You can never ever start. It's never too early to start networking. We're going to now go for a 15-minute break. Prof needs a drink. Loads of questions, and I'm sure you guys need just to get up and go to the loo or catch your tea or whatever. So we'll see you back in 15 minutes, where we're going to start our workshops. Now, you will note there are no parallel sessions. I don't like parallel sessions because I want to go to everything. So we've got 30 minutes for each session, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes in between. And please stay here and keep talking and keep tweeting and keep doing everything you're doing. Thank you ever so much. Go and have a break. Thanks, Prof.